Well, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us at what promises to be a timely and insightful discussion. My name is Antoine Marchand, and I have the honor of moderating today's panel. As we all know, trade dynamics are shifting rapidly, driven by geopolitics, industrial policy, and growing concerns around supply chain resilience. For companies operating between the U.S. and Mexico, and especially here in Texas, the stakes are high, and the landscape is evolving fast. I'm joined today by a distinguished panel of experts who bring a wide range of perspectives on trade, legal frameworks, policy, and business operations. Armando Beteta, managing partner at Roll & Harris, where he specializes in trade advisory and cross-border logistics strategies. William Methenitis, International Trade Counsel, an expert at Chartered Brokerage, with deep experience in customs planning, compliance, and duty recovery programs. Andres Alvarez, partner at Foley and Lardner, focused on international trade laws, customs, and regulatory strategy in complex U.S.-Mexico operations. Glenn Hammer, President and CEO of the Texas Association of Business, actively engaged in trade, workforce, and competitiveness policy. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right into it. Our first question, gentlemen, to start us off, could you give us a snapshot of the current tariff landscape impacting U.S.-Mexico trade? Specifically, which sectors and countries are most affected right now? Andres, would you like to lead the discussion?
Thank you, Antoine. Howdy. As Antoine was mentioning, Andres Alvarez, I'm a foreign legal consultant with Foley and Lardner, based here in Dallas, and I do cross-border work, mainly commercial and corporate transactional work. To your question, Antoine, for context, there has been around 12 to this moment proposals on tariffs. Some of them are at play, some of them are in who will see, what happens. Tariffs have been imposed, have been revoked, have been reimposed, have been suspended. It's hard to keep up. I was gonna say it's a nightmare, but it's hard to keep up. So as a summary, to put this in perspective, we have four kind of major buckets of tariffs. First, you have your fentanyl immigration-related tariffs, 25% across the board for China, Canada, and Mexico. Some of those will be suspended on USMCA-compliant products, which is good. Second, you have your historical 301, 232 tariffs, mainly for aluminum and steel. These are not new. They was just raised in the new administration of President Trump to 25%, and all of the exceptions were disregarded. They were deleted. There are a couple of exceptions here for steel that is melted and poured in the U.S. and aluminum that is being smelted and cast in the U.S., which is good, but this is still steel, aluminum, and derivative products, so screws, wires, whatever is made out of these materials is 25% with these exceptions. In this same category falls the promised tariffs on semiconductors, on copper, on lumber, on critical minerals, and so on. The list goes on. Then you have your reciprocal tariffs, which is for European wines and some spirits. And then you have another bucket, which in turn has a few more buckets, which is the reciprocal tariffs. And these tariffs are imposed to countries that it's 10% across the board, and then around 60 countries have higher tariffs, and these are based on countries that manipulate their currency or that have big trade deficits with the US, or impose higher tariffs, or imposes tariffs on high-value products such as automobiles. In terms of countries, obviously the most affected country is China. It's the target, actually, or not the target, but the most affected country by this. But also countries like Argentina, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Japan, South Korea, obviously Canada, Mexico, pretty much all the countries in the world are affected by this myriad of tariffs imposed by the present administration. And then you have one last bucket that is your de minimis, which is under discussion right now. De minimis is these tariff-free imports that are carried out by couriers, mainly DHL, FedEx, whatever, where they bring in products from abroad and they are duty-free because of the value. But that is also under discussion. So, and obviously this is still a moving target and it's hard to keep up, but that's at least the way I could summarize. I don't know if my fellow esteemed colleagues can complement these or throw another idea in this mix.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts.
Yes.
Without a doubt. Complex environments. I'm curious, Glenn, from the business community perspective, how are these tariffs being felt in the ground in Texas? And what industries are sounding the alarm most urgently? And what are the policy implications you're tracking?
Yeah, this is a big moment for the Texas business community because we are the top export state by far. We export twice as much as California, for example. So any sort of retaliation is going to be felt most fiercely here in the state of Texas. But the way I would put it is because, and the explanation as to what's out there, that was a really good summary, is that there's so many different moving pieces, is that it's created, and we talked about this before the event, so I don't want to make it sound like I came up with this. There's a lot of uncertainty, and when there's uncertainty, businesses hesitate or cease to invest. So we're starting to see that, certainly anecdotally, when different companies at different sectors are calling me, they're very, very nervous about this. And I want to just zoom out a little bit because when President Trump took office, there was a tremendous amount of excitement. The small business optimism, NFIB tracks this, was off the charts. There was a feeling, a correct one, that the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, so important for this economy, would be extended and enhanced. The regulatory environment under President Trump, particularly for a state like Texas, where we're an energy state, let's face it, the last administration was probably the worst in history when it came to over-regulating the economy. I don't think that's hyperbole. And with a lot of really destructive policies for the state of Texas, like pausing LNG. Think about that for a second. Mm-hmm. So the animal spirits were out. And we always knew that President Trump likes tariffs. Next to love or love and tariffs are his two favorite words. The business community wants certainty. So where we're approaching this right now is, the 10% baseline tariff isn't the hottest thing in the world, but it's probably something companies could adjust to. The reciprocal tariffs would have crashed the economy. And it will crash the economy. There's no way around that. I mean, even look at where we are today at 10%, which is, by the way, for those keeping score at home, we have right now the highest set of tariffs in 100 years. Is there anyone 100 years old? So we haven't, I'm getting there. So we haven't seen this playbook. So for the business community, what we're doing is we're sort of reverse engineering the coalition that helped get every single member of the Texas Business Coalition, the Texas Congressional Delegation to vote for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, TEMEC. We agree with President Trump. That's the best trade deal ever. We should build on it, not wreck it. And I want to thank David Zapata, who spoke earlier today. He does a great job running the trade in Mexico portfolio. And I see back there the trade evangelist, Jerry Schwebel. Jerry has been there since NAFTA. And because of the work of Jerry and the Texas business community and the congressional committee, it's one of the pillars. As our as Mexico's consul general to Dallas said, Mexico is a major reason why the Texas economy is the best in the nation. So to sum up, there's a lot of concern, a lot of alarm. We're trying to help find an off-ramp so we can stabilize the situation and create a dynamic where perhaps we accelerate nearshoring to Mexico and Canada by enhancing USMCA. And if we want to take on China, we need a strong Mexico and Canada, period. And it wouldn't kill us to also bring a few allies like Japan, UK, South Korea along the way. Final point, the way other countries should react, I do think Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu reacted in the exact right way. Other countries should go to zero tariffs and then put the pressure on the business community and the members of Congress to encourage the Trump administration to follow suit.
Thank you for very insightful thoughts, Glenn. And you brought up a point that is very important, uncertainty. Business planning is very complicated in the current environment. We do see shadow effects. The financial markets have been showing some hiccups in different fronts, the stock market, the bond market. So they're interesting times without a doubt. Moving on, if I can address the second question to you, gentlemen, how companies can respond to these challenges? What tools or strategies are available to help business navigate tariffs and remain competitive? Armando?
Thank you. Well, it's important, I think, under these catastrophic tariff scenario that we're currently living, where we don't know where tariffs are coming from, and as they are coming from everywhere, basically. I think it's important to point out and try to identify or put in buckets each of these tariffs in order to know how to address them, basically, and how to approach and be able to defend from these tariffs, mainly. In the case of course, initially, Canada and Mexico, the U.S. trading partners, were in the worst-case scenario when the 25% tariff was imposed to all Canada and Mexico, but not to all the countries. So it was kind of very ironic, no? Now, currently, fortunately, I believe the scenario for Mexico and Canada is one of the most positive ones, if we might say that. Because, of course, we know that these tariffs that are, as I was saying, these tariffs are different from the ones that the USMCA eliminates, which are the most favored nation rate tariffs. These additional tariffs are also getting a benefit when you use USMCA to eliminate. So that's why it's very important for companies to qualify their products as originating in order to eliminate the 25% tariff that is being imposed on fentanyl and that, and the MFN rate. So you would be killing or eliminating two tariffs at once if you qualify your products as originating. What does it mean to qualify as originating? It doesn't mean that the product, just because it's made and shipped from Mexico, it's originating. There are rules that you need to comply with in order to make sure that the product that you're manufacturing, let's say in Mexico, contains the minimal, let's say, regional content requirement in order to be eligible for a duty preference in the US. So that's where the complications come. And that's where a lot of companies are now, initially, a lot of companies were not using USMCA because the rate in the US was low. So they say it's a lot of hassle and burden for me to qualify my products if I'm going to be avoiding just 2.5% or tariff. So now that things have changed, and now that you have to avoid two different tariffs, the 25% plus probably a 2.5 at least, you need to qualify your products mainly. And in order to do so, it's complicated for companies because they need to reevaluate their sourcing, where their raw materials are coming from, and make sure that their content is North American enough in order to qualify and use that preference. So I think that's where the key is right now for companies, and Bill and I have been working together with several clients in that regard. Suddenly they're having to qualify the products under the USMCA when before they did, they had not to. And it's interesting, but it's around 50% of the companies in Mexico were only using the USMCA. Now, of course, hopefully it's going to be up to 80 or 90%, but it's not easy. It's a difficult process that needs to take place.
So the USMCA is a very important framework, and it's a strategic.
It's essential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Bill, could you walk us through how trade mechanisms like duty drawback, bonded warehouses, and foreign trade zones are helping companies manage the impact of tariffs?
Sure. Armando hit on a primary piece, that the USMCA part is certainly critical. And an important thing to remember about the rules of origin there is that they are product specific. So you have a different set of rules for automobiles and for technology products than you would for other kinds of things. So it's important to be able to work through those, and if you can get things completely exempt, then that's obviously the perfect piece. If you can't, or you have imports from other places, there are two U.S. tools that are commonly used to defer duties if they're the tariffs on things that are imported, or potentially eliminate them if they're imported and then re-exported. And those are called bonded warehouses and foreign trade zones. A bonded warehouse is an area that's bonded for customs that you can bring materials into, store them there, and keep them for a period of up to 5 years. If they're exported out of the U.S., there'd be no tariff applied. If they're imported into the U.S., you pay the tariff at the point that they're removed from the warehouse for domestic consumption. A foreign trade zone is also a bonded program, but it's both more complicated and the rules are more liberal in terms of how business can benefit. A foreign trade zone is an area that's physically in the U.S., but is considered outside of the customs territory of the U.S. So effectively, things can be brought into the foreign trade zone and they're not here from a tariff standpoint. The items that are later exported, whether in condition that they were imported or manufactured into finished products, can typically be exported without the imposition of any tariffs. The items that are brought in and either held in their same condition or manufactured into something else and then leave the foreign trade zone for a domestic location are eligible for tariff deferral. Right? They don't pay until they come out. They're in an MFN environment, as Armando said, in a standard tariff environment. There are some other benefits that manufacturers can receive in foreign trade zones where they can select the duty rate that's most favorable, whether it's on the component part or a finished product, based on a component basis. Unfortunately, all of the presidential orders that have imposed these specialty tariffs, and Andres was talking about, prohibit that election. So the tariffs will stick based on the condition of the product at the time that it was imported, but you can get significant deferral and a lot of benefits from re-exportation. I was talking to a company this morning on the phone that imports a lot of agricultural products, and a lot of it's seeds and things like that, and most of their markets are foreign. And they were saying that they're basically going to have to move out of the U.S. if they can't get a foreign trade zone quickly for their facility, so that they can treat the seeds and be able to export them without incurring the tariffs that are imposed from all these different places in the world that they import these products. So it can be an important tool, one that a lot of U.S.-Mexico trade hadn't had to use because of USMCA, but all of a sudden it becomes more important for those companies. One other tool that can be very valuable for companies is a program called duty drawback. And drawback is the oldest export promotion program in the United States. It was first put in place in the 1789 Alexander Hamilton tariff. And it provides that a product that's imported to the U.S., which is later exported, a product imported in the U.S. which is manufactured in a component product that's later exported, or a product that's imported in the U.S. and then a like-kind product is exported, the tariff can be recovered on that imported product. So you have to have the right business profile for this, and it's typically companies that are importing from multiple places. But just to give you a scenario, there have been some companies, in fact one that Armando and I are dealing with, that had moved a lot of production out of China into Mexico because of the 2017 actions that were taken by the Trump administration. They, like a lot of companies though, continue to have some production done in China and other parts of the world. They couldn't move everything. And they are incurring the China tariffs on all of the products they're importing from China. By moving production into Mexico, they're able to import, in some cases import and finish off in the U.S. the products that they'll be making and exporting elsewhere. And what they can effectively do is substitute that exported product for the imported product. So if it's let's just pick something, an access point like the ones that are in this room that are that are dealing with the cell reception. A technology product like that may be imported from China. It could be made and imported from Mexico. You take the Mexican product and export it to a foreign customer, and because they're the same type of product, you can substitute and get back the tariff paid on the Chinese good. So for the right profile company, that's an extremely valuable tool. It's not going to work for everybody, but that's something that that's a significant program. Charter Brokerage, where I work, is the largest drawback filer in the country. Last year, we recovered about $1.3 billion in drawback for companies. So and that's close to a third of the U.S. volume. So I mean, it's a significant program for people that qualify, and more companies are qualifying at this point, or having to look at it because of the imposition of all these tariffs from all over the world.
And are small businesses and medium companies taking advantage of all these tools?
They certainly can. There's no size limitations on these kinds of things. When you're looking at some of the bonded programs for storage, foreign trade zone operational costs can be fairly high. So smaller companies are typically not jumping into that, but bonded warehouse is a pretty low lift, and easy to get fairly quickly, and as long as you've got the appropriate security, the facilities can be managed fairly economically.
Thank you, Bill. I'm thinking, and maybe Andres, you can help us in regards to how companies are using contractual mechanisms and Incoterms
Right.
to manage their tariff
Of
exposure.
course, Antoine, and just let me build tariffs stick and stack. So
They're both.
have to be careful. So yes, I mean, contracts is one way to deal with this. If you have the flexibility, you have to be flexible when you are negotiating contracts. For contracts that you already negotiated and are undergoing, you may want to discuss with your counterparts whether you're willing to renegotiate and how to deal with this tariff. Some contracts will have a provision that deals with either cost sharing or some other mechanism to deal with tariffs specifically. Most contracts do not, kind of like with COVID. None contract said pandemics in force majeure clauses. After COVID, every contract I've read has a pandemic force majeure clause. Probably it's the same right now. So you want to talk to your counterparts, see if you can renegotiate the contracts. Incoterms are a good mechanism when you know what the actual Incoterm means. So who's bearing what risk? That's a good way to deal with it. The other thing is just deal with the contracts themselves. There are also additional mechanisms, Antoine, that may help you get there. And that has to do with your supply chain. That has to do with how well do you know where are your risks in terms of imports, map them, and how do you deal with those risks from a supply chain standpoint. And then also, of course, higher tariffs mean higher enforcement. And I think there's an express instruction from President Trump asking CBP to attack everything they can see, to review every import as the only import they are having to see. So you have to be very careful as well with your customs compliance programs. You have to, you have to do, and this is probably for big companies, this is easier than for smaller, medium-sized companies, but undertake customs audits on a regular basis. If you can deal with, if you detect a mistake in your calculations to CBP, self-correct before customs comes to you. That will mean you probably pay additional taxes, but you won't be fined, which is good, at least. Do what is called a reasonable care memorandum, which basically means that you took all necessary precautions to benefit from a trade agreement, for instance, to make sure that you are complying with the benefits. So in the case you're actually not, that would be accounted for a little more lenience from the authority to go after you. So you have to deal with all of these things that may not be, you have to think about them and map them and think how you deal with all of this myriad of tariffs that are out there.
Wow, so information is power.
Yeah.
Being informed is an important strategic advantage companies now have to acquire. Glenn, from your perspective, how are companies in Texas, particularly small and medium companies, adapting to this new environment?
Yeah, well, I want to first thank the four gentlemen that are on the stage, because you're doing a tremendous amount of good in a tough area. Because a lot of small or medium-sized businesses really don't know how they could adjust, and they need help. They really need help. Because for a larger company, there's a lot of things you could do with supply chains. There's a lot of things you could do to absorb additional costs. But if you're a small business, so think if those reciprocal tariffs landed and you were faced with a bill of 40%, 50% increase that there's no way you could have planned for, that could bankrupt you. And I think that there are some examples out there for think about specialty food stores and things like that. I was in it's still alive and well, I don't want to say it isn't, but I was in a great international market in Houston last week. By definition, all of their products are imported. And I'm not sure why that business should be penalized for providing all this yummy food from all around the world that American workers benefit from the jobs, that an entrepreneurial small business benefits from, and customers benefit from. And I should have also said a few other things to put a fine point. When I say USMCA is the most effective trade deal ever, well, this is what I mean by it. Before that trade deal took effect, China was the top trading partner of the United States. Do you think that's so hot for our national or economic security? Chairman Xi does. I don't. Since that agreement took effect, Mexico is our #1 trading partner. Canada is our #1 export market. That's good. That's effective. And I should say, when I say tariffs, I really think I need some sort of electric shock. If I say tariffs and don't mention that tariffs are taxes, I do think I should be punished a little bit. Because they're taxes, and they're taxes on American businesses and American consumers. And that's why the public, any way you slice or dice it or spin it, they don't like it, they're unpopular, and we have an obligation in the business community to figure out how to land this plane so that we could live in a lower, more stable tariff environment. And I want to thank, I can't recall if I said this earlier, but our junior senator, Senator Ted Cruz, has been doing a great job of really providing a roadmap for the administration as to how we could reduce barriers for other countries. And that's why I was saying the Israel approach is good. Take away any excuse that the president and the administration might have, and let's give our great exporters greater opportunities. And final point that gets lost, we have a pretty significant surplus in the United States in terms of the services that we export. We don't want to ruin that advantage. And if we don't start landing these tariff issues soon, we're going to be in trouble. And I think the pressure really is on the administration to demonstrate that it can actually negotiate some trade deals in the next 90 days. It was 80 days, 70 days, whatever the shot clock is at.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
All right, I'll take it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm curious that learning the goals or the objectives that you want to accomplish in specific initiatives, and that will be helpful, I think, as well.
So the president wants to, so they have a few other things going on. They want to raise revenue, and they have different ways of doing it. One way is tariffs, so that they could cut or continue to extend income taxes. There is a way, and I did ask my new best friend, BFF, Grok 3, there is a way to, I'm serious, you could really put in these prompts, it's not that difficult, of how you could raise a significant amount of money for keeping North America tariff-free and reducing the chances for severe retaliation. We could design it before we have tequila later tonight. What the administration is doing, I'll say this, they're moving in the right direction. The original plan was chaos. Everyone knows it. They're moving in the right direction. I admire the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent. He's the right person in that role. So I'm optimistic we'll be able to land the plane. And what we've been discussing is, wow, we could turn lemons into lemonade if we really make North America, we build on USMCA, force field any sort of tariffs so we could build stuff together and better compete with China and the rest of the world.
Yeah, and actually, if I may add,
Yeah.
the approach that Mexico has taken, I think, has been positive in the sense that there's no reciprocity tariffs, precisely because there are taxes. The president doesn't want to tax the people in Mexico. But besides that, I think the fact that the USMCA is going to be reviewed and probably strengthened in a way that even right now the agreement already has several provisions that not only the origin qualification sort of makes it a strong market, but in addition to that, there are provisions that actually may be able to restrict the importation of certain, let's say, Chinese components, basically. And if properly enforced or properly used, you can definitely manage a bloc that's going to compete with China versus just being the U.S. on its own.
Which was the original idea of the
Exactly.
NAFTA for starters. that was the best, the starter of
Exactly.
the whole thing.
Well, I thought the Consul General made a good point. It wasn't just about trade. It was about making the United States more competitive economically.
Yep.
Yep. Well, very well said, gentlemen. Thank you. At this point, I would like to open the floor to questions from the audience. If anybody wants to ask a question.
Thank you. Great. We got this great discussion, great panel, and I'd like to direct my question to William. Sorry, I can't pronounce your last name. You and I have the same curse. But I'd like if you could cover the disruptor of the actual process of collecting the duties by the importer of record and the custom brokers, and what that's created in regards to the whole process of the speed and what it means to a custom broker's customer or the actual importer of record.
Yeah, actually, I think that Customs and Border Protection's done a really good job of getting programming in place quickly, because some of these orders have been, virtually overnight in taking effect. But the detail of some of them have made it extremely difficult for companies to comply. And to give you an example, and one of the things that Andres had talked about was the steel and aluminum derivatives being added to the steel and aluminum tariffs. So that's not just screws. One of the things that applies to is, for example, if you have an aluminum extrusion in a heat sink that's going into a computer. I was in Brussels a few weeks ago and had a French lawyer I was dealing with who was trying to advise a company that was exporting. Those are required to be measured and valued separately, and you're required to provide the weight of the aluminum extrusion, because the aluminum extrusions are dutiable ordinarily by weight, not by number. So you got one computer that's coming in. In that computer is a heat sink that's got an aluminum extrusion inside of it, and the exporter's got to figure out how much does that aluminum extrusion weigh, and how much of the value of the computer is tied to that aluminum extrusion, and report that on a separate line item to Customs. That's really hard, right? So, it's the detail that has to be gone to with some of these, some of the tariffs for imports is just extraordinary, and there are bound to be lots of mistakes made. And one thing, back to Andres' point on mistakes and double checking your supply chain and looking at your customs compliance. The other thing that's been an interesting event to watch is that the Justice Department has made 2 announcements in the last 2 weeks about new investigation on whistleblower cases on customs duties. So they aren't necessarily you couldn't tell in detail what they were tied to, but the way that those work Typically under the False Claims Act, a company can go to the Justice Department and say, hey, these guys are cheating, I think they're cheating, ask the Justice Department to look into it. The Justice Department takes the case and files suit, and what's called a qui tam action. The whistleblower can get up to 30% of the recovery. So, you know, when you start looking at the size of these tariffs that are coming in, you don't have to worry just about customs looking at you. You have to worry about making mistakes and some disgruntled employee, you know, turning you in because they think that you're unable to comply with those rules and they're going to get a payday. So, you know, again, different things to think about that make this an extremely treacherous environment to be dealing in.
Yeah. Can I? So my name's John. I'm from here in Dallas. Curious, I used to work for the Bush administration, and I was just a low-level guy. But one of the things that was a hallmark of his presidency was kind of a more, let me see how to say this. The decisions were made in a kind of uniform way, and then we did a lot of work to roll out our policies that in a way that people could understand them. And so, and I know that you mentioned Senator Cruz. A good friend of mine is a committee staffer for them, and when I'm texting him the night that all this reciprocal stuff was announced, he's like, I don't know either, you know? So I'm just curious as far as the communication side of it, explaining this in a way, if it's a good policy, it's a good policy, but being able to explain that to even the people who are the chief economists of the Commerce Committee, that they can explain it to people like me.
Well, I think it's an audience of one. And I'm serious about that. You know, when Jamie Dimon went on Fox News, it was to appeal directly to President Trump. And, you know, that's not to say there aren't pressure points within the administration that could help get us to a good situation. You know, I want to see, what I look for is how much stronger is the Secretary of Treasury? How much weaker? I think Peter Navarro, his policies are completely inconsistent. He hates China, and he loves tariffs. The United States can compete and beat China in any sort of trade situation if we're smart, if we work with Mexico and Canada and our allies. The United States against the world, we're not going to win that. We only have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the GDP. Which, by the way, when you think about how much we've punched above our weight, it's sort of hard to say, excuse my language, that we've been screwed for so many years. We've done okay. Could there be more fairness? Absolutely. Should the EU consistently regulate the heck out of our tech companies when we innovate, they regulate? No. But this is, you know, the original game plan here was not well thought out. But I want to, again, give the president and the administration credit for trying to find a different path. And there is still a path, and Senator Cruz is the best person that I've found to articulate this, where the United States and Texas could come out ahead. And that's what we all need to work on. And one final point, you know, Jerry, you asked a great questions about, because I said, you know, tariffs are taxes, yes, but they're really more than that. They're really taxes and regulations combined. And you want to talk about draining the swamp. This fills the swamp. Yeah. It may be good for you guys, but it fills the swamp. And it's not healthy when all these companies have to worry about all of these different elements. I wasn't even thinking of the False Claims Act. So, you know, it runs counter to the terrific deregulatory activities of all these different agencies. This is going in the exact opposite direction. So, you know, Jerry, I'm going to not just say that tariffs are taxes, but they are swamp-filling regulatory items as well that we need to respectfully resist.
Len, question for you. You were talking in a kind of hopeful tone that North
We're
America...
in Texas. Come on.
that the North America project is going to come out stronger. I share that view, and we've talked about this in the past. And I liked your idea of geofencing North America and using tariffs to geofence North America to make it more competitive. And earlier today, we were discussing about the opportunity of semiconductors and how Texas is taking a leading role in that, right? So I'd love to get your thoughts on how can North America become more competitive? That path forward that you're imagining in new industries that we are relocating to the Americas, like semiconductors, how does that play out? And could we foresee, for instance, a semiconductor chapter in the renewed USMCA? Or what is the vision? How does success look like in that path that you're seeing forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Fernando, and thank you for all of your great leadership. And thanks for, it's so great to have so many people from Yucatan here. That's terrific. I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. Let's build on this. On the workforce side, the TN visas, the NAFTA visas, we need more workers, particularly in a state like Texas, where the economy is doing so well. So I think putting more emphasis on sectors like semiconductor, space, AI. I think there's a lot more we could do in energy, and AI intersect. And I also just want to thank. I think President Sheinbaum has been doing a very good job of helping stabilize events in North America. And I want to thank our friends in Canada for working very hard on migration and fentanyl as well. And we should work on all of these all of these initiatives and issues that enrich us. So I love your idea of trying to find these new chapters as well that would certainly be good for Texas. By the way, I have to say it, we do export more semiconductors than any other state. So we could use deeper supply chains that extend south of the border as well.
Hey, so my question is very related and relate to anyone who feels like they have the best answer here. So in the same way that I think semiconductors are a critical industry that the U.S. has to own from an economic, from a trade, from a geopolitical standpoint, I would argue that clean energy, at a minimum, batteries is exactly like that. We know that China's got a 20-plus year head start, and as misguided as I think a lot of the tariff policy has been, to the extent that it can help us onshore and own these value chains that are going to be critical to the next century, that's potentially good. However, I think the real fear would be, do we have a tariff regime that makes all of the downstream industries uneconomic without being able to foster a local technology and supply chain around batteries? So is there a role, regardless of where I guess the tariff conversation comes out, like is there also a role for incentives, tax support, things we honestly saw in the IRA in combination with tariffs, if that's what you believe, but in making sure that we take these critical industries, whether it's semiconductor or battery or clean energy? Love your perspective on that.
Well, I'll just say, this is one where I do think there is a legitimate role to at least think about tariffs on China, because China emits more carbon emissions than anyone. Texas produces great clean natural gas, but we're also number one in solar utility scale. We're number one in wind. We're coming up fast in batteries. We're going to be the center of the nuclear renaissance, which is carbon free. But I do think that tariffs could play a role with China, because they do get an advantage because they belch out more coal emissions. And I'll let our West Virginia friends defend coal. So I think there is some legitimacy to that, and there is an incentive piece of that helps us compete as well.
Do we need a little bit of incentives in the short term to get that industry going while tariffs are protected, or is it just tariffs alone?
I think targeted incentives, as long as you could show you're going down a cost curve and you can get there without incentives for different technologies, makes sense, including for nuclear, including for carbon capture.
Okay. Very good. Well, we're running out of time. I don't know if we have time for one more question.
Glenn, sorry to pick on you again.
That's all right.
So, Rafael Herrera, I've been living, I'm from Mexico, but I've been living in Houston for 45 years now. Great to hear that Senator Cruz is, thinking the same way, or you think he's one of the key rollers of what you were talking about, and hopefully, Senator Cornyn as well. But
he's been great too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what about our governor? We haven't heard anything from him on these issues. And I was wondering what your thoughts are and why he's been so silent on
No, the governor recently, I think within this week, it may have been Monday or Tuesday, spoke with the Secretary of Treasury, Besant. Governor Abbott is the best jobs governor in America, hands down. And Texas is, we're 31 million people. He's doing, in our view, everything right to continue to grow this economy. Tariffs are a federal issue. We need our federal lawmakers to be more actively engaged, like Senator Cruz, to provide constructive ways we could land this plane. But Governor Abbott, he didn't get a lot of coverage, but he did have what I understand was a very productive conversation with Secretary Besant. And if you go on Governor Abbott's website, he did put out a press release about that conversation. And I'm pretty sure trade issues came up. And I just also have to say, we obviously have to be smart about this. I mean, I'll just say this. This may not be the most popular thing in this room, but 95% of the stuff that the Trump administration is doing, I love. The success on the border, securing the border, it went from an absolute disaster that caused a lot of problems to a trickle of people. There's probably more people now trying to cross illegally into Canada than into the United States. And again, we have Mexico to thank for that, for a lot of it. So we've got to be smart about it. Insulting anyone doesn't work, and that's why I think President Sheinbaum has been very, very effective in how she's been dealing with this situation. And the president does have a point. Is it right that India has such high tariffs? Is it right that you could go to a lot of countries in Europe and you don't really see U.S. cars? I don't think so, but how you go about that. When you mentioned President Bush's administration, these are issues that if you identify, you'll get the business community to constructively engage, and we'll get better results. Pulling something that feels arbitrary and changes by the moment is probably not the best way to deal with the situation. But again, I do feel that directionally things are going in the right way, and we have to continue to all work together, and that's why this forum is so timely and important.
Yep. Well, I want to thank sincerely our panelists for sharing your valuable insights. Thank you all for being here and for participating in our discussion.
Thank you.